As citizens, many of us are often confused about what is happening. What does the government mean by its stand? What does the civil society members mean by their stand? And what are the implications of these perspectives on, particularly with regard to how it is going to affect the common man? How is the common man going to be affected by the Jan Lokpal bill when it comes into place? It is to enable this discussion, it is to enable the answer to such queries that we are organizing this seminar today. Thank you. It is to enable such discussion, it is to enable the answer to such queries that today's seminar is being organized. The objective behind today's seminar is to create awareness among citizens in general about the Lokpal bill, to seek views. Many of you here are very honorable and distinguished citizens here who have expertise and experience in various walks of life. The seminar today is also to seek your views and your participation in the legislation in the discussions on the legislation. Another point is to strengthen citizen participation in this movement in order that together we manage to get a strong and effective Jan Lokpal legislation through. And for this purpose, today we have with us here Dr. Ashwin Mahesh, who has been part of the Jan Lokpal movement from its very beginning in Karnataka, way back in January 2011. Dr. Mahesh has various credentials to his credit, and the foremost among them is he is right now currently a member of the Abide task force in Bangalore, which was set up by the Chief Minister in order to enable interaction with civil society organizations. He is a visiting faculty to the Center for Public Policy at IIM Bangalore. Besides that, he has been the founder member and the current editor of an online magazine called India Together, which has discussed over the last few years many relevant issues with regard to many relevant public issues. And further to that, and most important of all, Dr. Ashwin Mahesh has been an inspiration to many of us over here to make various contributions to aspects of public service. It is an honor to start our first seminar on the Jan Lokpal legislation as part of IAC Bangalore at this very place, at the Gokhale Institute of Public Affairs, which has been a host and which has honored so many people and which has discussed so many important public issues over the years. We'll have the presentation. So I would now like to invite Dr. Ashwin Mahesh to carry forward this session. And just to give the broad guidelines of the session, this is going to be a 1.5 hour session. Approximately 30 to 45 minutes is where Dr. Ashwin Mahesh is going to speak. And since we intend this to be an interactive session, the rest of the time, that is around 45 minutes of time, we will have a question-answer session. We invite you, all of you, to participate in this session, give your feedback, give your views, and together we need to ensure that through the entire process of consultation, we form the best and the most effective Jan Lokpal. Thank you. Before the talk by Dr. Ashwin Mahesh, we'll have a short film of how the Jan Lokpal movement has proceeded forward in Bangalore and in India also. More as the corruption capital of India. And it was with this regard, it was with this anguish that thousands of people got together in December 2010 to launch this huge campaign again called Saku Corruption. And there we had a march. Shri Arvind Kejriwal, who is now the forefront of the national corruption movement, was present in 2010, in December 2010 for this march. Post that, when we looked at this this corruption movement really took on at a national level. In January 2011, we had the first movement at a national level, which was initiated by Anna Hazare, Arvind Kejriwal, and their team in Delhi. And we had a first march on Jan 30th, which symbolized the fact that we are taking on the legacy from the father of the nation. We had a Dandi March, which was Dandi March 2 on Jan 30th. And post that, as many of you are aware, in April, we had a 4-day long fast. Of course, it was declared as an indefinite fast, but before the fast could move on, the government had taken some measures and had accepted to form a joint committee. Very important to note, because there's a lot of argument about whether civil society, what should be the participation of civil society organizations in the Jan Lokpal movement. Very important to note that in April, the only thing that the India Against Corruption movement actually asked from the government was to form a committee where civil society participants would be part of it. The movement did not ask for an alternate draft, but it asked only for participation as part of the committee. The video is fine? Yeah. Okay. So we can go on to the video now, and then we can have Dr. Ashwin Mahesh who tell us. Yeah, thanks.
ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಲಂಚ ಲಂಚ ಲಂಚ
ಬರ್ತ್ ಸರ್ಟಿಫಿಕೇಟ್ ಬೇಕಂದ್ರು ಲಂಚ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು. ಮನುಷ್ಯ ಸತ್ತಮೇಲೆ ಡೆತ್ ಸರ್ಟಿಫಿಕೇಟ್ ಬೇಕು ಅಂದ್ರು ಕೊಡಬೇಕು. ತಪ್ಪು 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 ಲಂಚ ತಗೊಳ್ಳೋದು ತಪ್ಪು.
For the common man of Karnataka, please welcome Dr. Ashwin Mahesh.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. When I was a young boy, my parents would talk about great heroes of independence and say, ಇವರ ಹತ್ರನೇ ಇರಬೇಕು. It's very hard. You look at Gandhiji, it's not very clear you can be like that even if you try. Also, he was not very fashion conscious, so I was not attracted to that. Then they said, okay, at least be like Vishwesharaya. That also seemed particularly hard. So many things a person like that achieves in life, and you wonder, what can you do? It's all good to have role models, but you must have somebody that you can actually think, okay, if we try, each one of us can be like that. And so I was very fascinated actually with Gopal Gokhale, because it seemed like a reachable kind of goal. I'm not saying that to say that Gokhale was not a great man, but it seemed like the kind of things that he stood for were reachable by ordinary people. That if you say, I want to be a public servant, a servant of India, it seemed like a reachable goal, that all you really had to do was try. You think about what it means to be a servant of India and do what you can. So I said, okay, that's a reasonable goal. Can we go to the next thing? So in 2000, as Ajit said, I run India Together, which is the largest public affairs magazine in India. And in 2002, we published an article called Servants of India. It was about the Servants of India Society. I'm sure in this institute, many of you know the Servants of India Society. In 1905, Gopal Krishna Gokhale and 3 others started the Servants of India Society. And the idea was that public service and public life should be enriched by a spiritual consciousness and an individual determination to do something. It was, in its time, a fairly successful institution. And as long as Sri Gokhale was its leading force, certainly well-liked, well-known, and well-reputed in the independence movement. So I was very glad after 100 years that we were still remembering this institution. Last week was the 106th anniversary of the Servants of India Society. What this country needs is more servants. And that is why we should talk about the Lokpal Bill. The Lokpal Bill, or any legislation against corruption, is anchored in one idea, that people who hold public office are servants of India. Whether you and I, as private citizens, choose to live that way is different. But if you hold a public office, you must see yourself as a servant of India, and the law must see you as a servant of India. That is the basis of all our anti-corruption work. Next one. Unfortunately, since Gokhale, we have come a very long way, and a lot of it has been downhill. Last year, we can safely say that last year was one of the worst years of post-independence India. If we use the measure of how much people in public office were servants of India, we had scam after scam, not only at the center, but also here in the state and in the city as well. And it seemed then, and it still seems, that there is no end to it. That by the time you are finished absorbing the gory details of one scam, the next one is already before us. It is merely a matter of saying who will be hauled away next. Will it be Dayanidhi Maran? Will it be Kanimari? Will it be Sharad Pawar? Will it be, there is no list that you can make that is long enough to include all of the jokers who need to be hauled away and put behind bars in this country. Unfortunately, this is not a straightforward thing. That there are systematic reasons in the law why it is difficult to do this, and there are functional reasons in administration why it is difficult to do this, and there are moral reasons among individuals why it has been difficult to do this. All of these need to be overcome. You need a society in which people want to do the right thing, that the systems of government help you do the right thing, and leaders in government stand for the right thing. You need all three of these together to achieve the kind of society that we want. Unfortunately, we don't have that. Some of that is the failure of leadership. Some of that is the failure of administration. But some of that is our failure. Our failure to be properly engaged with the government as citizens of this country and participate in the democratic running of this country on a day-to-day basis. We must overcome this. I'm going to give you a short example. The rot is very deep. This, many of you know, is a picture from the Sachidananda Nagara Nyayapara Andolana last year, where residents of one neighborhood here in Bangalore have been fighting the BBMP to get their property katas without paying a bribe. The system of kata generation for this neighborhood has historically included payment of bribes to various people, administrators as well as elected representatives. So the difficulty is that down to the very last officer in the department, there is resistance. When the BBMP commissioner writes a letter saying these people should be issued katas, the junior most officer in the revenue section of BBMP at the zonal level is able to say, "Nan madalla sir, idu madakagalla." We have a system of administration that allows people to get away with this kind of notorious interference in public good. When the Lokayukta summons an officer to take action against him, the day before the Lokayukta summons is, the day before he is supposed to appear in the Lokayukta's office, he is transferred. ಹೊಸದಾಗಿ ಒಬ್ಬನು ಬರ್ತಾನೆ, ಸರ್ ನನಗೆ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನು ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, ಅವ್ನು 3 ತಿಂಗಳು ಬೇಕು ಫಾರ್ ಮಿ ಟು ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ವಾಟ್ ದಿಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಕಮ್ ಬ್ಯಾಕ್ ಟು ಯು ಅಗೇನ್. So the systems are counterproductive, and to go into it on a case-by-case basis and tackle each one of them is ridiculously difficult. I remember in this particular case, some of us were sitting in BBMP office till 1 p.m. in the night. And the zonal officer himself was telling me, "Sir, you please sit here in the office, because if you don't sit here, all these rowdies will come and start tearing up the files." That is the level of control that we have ceded to the unlawful elements in our society. There are 5 kinds of limitations. There are 5 reasons primarily why fighting corruption is difficult in this country. One is appointments of convenience. If you appoint a fox to guard the chicken coop, all the chickens will be eaten. It's a very simple thing. There is no other logic that will follow. So throughout the system, we have appointments of convenience. People who are supposed to do public good oppose the public good because they have been appointed to do the public good. It is everywhere, not only in anti-corruption agencies, in department after department, in section after section, appointments are made on the basis of money. In some places like the police forces, you cannot even enter until you have paid money. If you have a system of recruitment in which the only way to get a job is to pay money, naturally you have no other choice but to participate in recovering that money. In fact, the system has realized that if you put this entry fee at the gate itself, ಹೊಸದಾಗ ಬರೋರು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಒಂದು ಟೋಲ್ ಥರ $1 ಕೋಟಿ, $1 ಲಕ್ಷ, $10 ಲಕ್ಷ ಹಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು according to the rank if you set up, then you can be confident that they will not fight corruption. Because on the day they came into the office itself, they were corrupt. So this is how the system is set up. Appointments of convenience. The second is wherever there are anti-corruption organizations like the Lokayukta, like the Vigilance Commission, like the CAG, these often do not have powers to investigate something simply because they think something is wrong. You take the 2G spectrum. Today we are saying 176,000 crores. Where can you even hide 176,000 crores? You mentioned ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದಾನೆ ಇಷ್ಟೊಂದು ದುಡ್ಡನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು. We ask all these questions. But this is not new. The 2G scam was known to be happening even when it was happening. But we don't have a system by which the anti-corruption agency, on its own, thinking that something might be going wrong, can start looking around and seeing what to do. We have a system by which somebody makes a complaint, somebody says the corruption has already taken place, you have to request the government for permission to do something. If the government gives permission, then you carry out some action. Even after carrying out the action, you can only give recommendations, you cannot give punishment. This is the system. The system will never catch anybody who is committing a crime. The most you can hope for is to identify a person after he has committed the crime. Even then, it stops with identification. You cannot actually do anything about the fact that he has committed the crime. The third is recommendations rather than orders. Lokayukta, this is a well-known problem in Karnataka. Lokayukta has said repeatedly that he needs to have the power to take action based on his findings, not give recommendations. Recommendations can be ignored by so many people who have a vested interest in ignoring them. That is what we have seen again and again. So this is a third limit. I'm pointing to the structural limitations. The fourth is the definition of public servants. This is a problem all over the country. I don't know if you know, last year 2 of our newly elected BBMP corporators were taken to court on charges of corruption. You know, when they were in court, what they argued? They did not argue that they were innocent. They might argue that later. But on the first day they went to court, they did not argue that they were innocent. They said, I am not a public servant. And therefore, I cannot be prosecuted under the Prevention of Corruption Act. Think about that. On the day that he was campaigning, Manek Hogaga, would he have dared to tell anybody, I am not a public servant, but vote for me anyway? He would not. So while campaigning, he is quite happy to pretend that he is a public servant. Idu ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ sir, adu ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ sir, ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಲಿಸ್ಟ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. But after he is elected and found unworthy of being in office, he says, I am not a public servant. Therefore, the law cannot touch me. The definition of public servant is important. In the current CRPC, there is certain vagueness in defining who a public servant is. The last point, structurally, is deputed staff. In every anti-corruption agency, the people who are staffed, at least 50% of the staff, and in places like Lokayukta, most of the staff are deputed from other agencies. 3, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, they will be in Lokayukta. Adadmele, they have to go back to their original department. Nobody in his right mind will do diligent work in the Lokayukta's office or in the CVC or in the CAG if he knows that few years later he will be posted back to his home department and come under the supervision of superiors whom he has to investigate while he is in the Lokayukta's office. It's life. If I tell you this man will be your future boss, but investigate him anyway, you will not do it. It's common sense. But that's what we have. So these are the structural limitations that need to be overcome through legislation. Next. I'm going to take a few slides to talk about the citizenship part. A lot of people believe that ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗಲ್ಲ. The problem is so big that ನಾವು ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೂ ಪ್ರಯೋಜನವೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. I don't agree with that. I think every little bit counts. That a lot of people are already doing a lot of things, that if you decide to join that, you will make change more likely. You are not alone in the fight against corruption, but you must join the fight. This is what we have been saying repeatedly. We do not expect anybody to do anything on their own. We recognize the risks, we recognize the challenges, we recognize the difficulties, we recognize the demands of time. But we recognize also that we are servants of India. And therefore we ask you to join us. Next. We'll go back to the previous one. So I'm just going to recap a little of the ground that Ajit went through. In December last year, we had the SAKU campaign. And many of you, I recognize many of the faces, were in the SAKU public campaign. And it was quite an interesting moment, because it seemed for the first time that lots of people who are not ordinarily politically active and alert were coming out to say, Sakappa, enough of this. And I felt that if that could be expanded into something that was countrywide, after all, the difficulties are countrywide. Why should the protest alone be only in Bangalore or only in a few places? And Arvind had come to the SAKU meet as well, and he was part of that rally. And when we were discussing how we could turn this into something more powerful, one of the things that he said was, well, if we pick one goal and say, okay, let us try to galvanize everybody around that goal, then it will become easier. Because simply to say, we are against corruption, Brashtachara Saku, and helodu, that is not big enough, it is not concrete enough to achieve public support. So we said it is important to have a goal. And we said we will pick the goal. The goal that was picked late last year was the passage of the Lokapala bill. That Parliament must introduce, debate, and pass the Lokapala bill. This is the goal that was decided. And according to this goal, in late last year itself, and again in early part of this year, we said the goal must include public figures who are widely respected for their integrity, and therefore they command the attention and the respect of large numbers of people. After a great amount of thought and a great amount of persuasion, it was finally agreed that Sri Anna Hazare would be the person to lead this thing. And in January, Annaji wrote to the Prime Minister saying, in the first week of April, by the first week of April, that is 3 months from now, by the first week of April, if Parliament has not introduced the Lokapala bill, I will begin fasting at Jantar Mantar and encourage people all over the country to join me. This was done in January. Come back. So this went on for 2 months. The government, there was no noise even about it. Actually, it was only in the middle of March, towards the late period of March, that there started to be noises that Anna Hazare was mobilizing for a fast at Jantar Mantar. Until then, it was more or less ignored in the usual way that many things are ignored in government. Go to the next slide. In late March, almost towards the very end, 31st of March, 1st of April, we received a call from Veerappa Moili's office. He's the law minister, as you know, saying, where is that file you sent us about this Lokapala thing? In that letter in January, we had said what all a Lokapala legislation should contain. Okay? And then 2 days before the fast was going to begin, when they got the sense that this might become a media event, they frantically called to say, can you send that thing again? So anyway, we sent it to them again. They have lots of files that they lose, so this is also one of them. So we sent them the file again. Next. And because it takes them some time to study everything, the implications are quite long. And so we, in the early part of April, 2nd, I think, or 5th, 4th or 5th, Annaji started his fast at Jantar Mantar. There were several hundred people, maybe even 1,500 people the first day at Jantar Mantar. And in a few other parts of the country, there were pockets of people who were doing protests, including here in Bangalore at Freedom Park. It was not a very large protest on the first day. There were 50 of us, 70 of us maybe. And by nightfall on the first day, there were only a handful of people, 7 or 8 people on the first day. A few of the people who were fasting indefinitely, including some who are here in this hall, I think they and many others, we started to feel, on such a big issue, why is it that only a few people in the city are willing to come and show their support? It's hard to say what changed. Maybe the risk that Anna would get seriously ill, or maybe just the noise levels were high. Arvind has a way of attracting attention, which also keeps things going. And so amidst all these things, the next day and the subsequent day and by the fourth day, it had grown exponentially. Each day there was growth. The first day there were 50 people, the second day there were 300, the third day there were 800, and the fourth day there were 10,000 people. And many of you came to the candlelight vigil that we held at Freedom Park. From Anandrao Circle all the way up to KR Road, on both sides of the street, there were rows and rows of people holding candles. It was completely filled. For the first time in my life, I said, every person who is capable of coming to an event like this and showing support for anti-corruption work seems to be here. And we realized that this was not happening only in Bangalore, but in every other city. In HD Kotek, 25,000 signatures were collected in rural areas, among the tribal villages, to send to the Tahsildar, and then through the Tahsildar to the DC, to send to the Prime Minister. All over the country, in hundreds of cities, lakhs of people were participating in the anti-corruption fast. And of course, the government changed its mind and said, all right, we will have a joint drafting committee to decide what should be in this Lokapal bill. Next. No, we go to the next. Hold on, come back. So in many ways, it seemed like a victory of the people to achieve an important outcome. We were saying, some of you may have seen Annaji's interview yesterday, carried in Business Standard and a few other papers this morning, in which he says, this is the country of the people. Parliament must do what the people want, not what Parliament wants. Because, and I'm saying this for a reason, Parliament consists of our elected representatives. There are two words there. Parliamentarians like to remind us that they are elected, and therefore they should do the things on our behalf. We like to remind them that they are representatives, and therefore they should do the things that we want. Being elected is incidental to that. This is important because the question that has come up repeatedly since the April 8th agreement to form the drafting committee is lawmakers are always telling us, Parliament is supreme. No, Parliament is not supreme. The people are supreme. Parliament is a body of public servants who are required under the law, who are required under any moral standard to serve the people. They cannot pass legislation that people oppose in such large numbers on matters of principle, that too. Next. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Lokapal bill. In 1968, following the recommendations of the first Administrative Reforms Commission, led by our former Chief Minister, Kengal Hanumanthaya, it was decided that, by then itself it was quite clear. I should have mentioned Nehru also in the introduction I said, my mother would say, be like Gandhi, be like Vishwesvaraya. She would say, be like Nehru also. But it was clear that even Nehru's daughter and grandchildren were not like Nehru, so it didn't seem like much point in my trying to be like Nehru. But in any event, by the late 1960s, it was becoming apparent that somehow Nehru was giving way to Indira, and perhaps the nation needs some controls to check this. So the Administrative Reforms Commission recommended that we should have a Lokpal in the national capital and Lokayuktas in the state capitals to act as ombudsmen, guardians of the public trust, to curtail and tackle corruption in public life. The bill was introduced in Parliament in 1968. It was introduced in the Lok Sabha. Now, many of you may not know this. When a bill is introduced in the Lok Sabha, if it is not, and it was even passed in the Lok Sabha. This is the other interesting thing. I have put the 1968 in green for a reason. In 1968, the Lok Sabha passed the Lokpal bill, but the Rajya Sabha did not. And the bill was dissolved. Or what you say, the bill lapsed, to use a legal language. Bills that are introduced in the Lok Sabha will lapse whenever the term of the Lok Sabha ends. Bills that are introduced in the Rajya Sabha. The Rajya Sabha is a perpetual body. The Lok Sabha is a term-based body. After every general election, there is a term for the Lok Sabha. When that term ends, all the business of the Lok Sabha ends. The Rajya Sabha is not like that. The Rajya Sabha is a continuing body. Every second year, 1/3 of its members are replaced. So if a legislation is introduced in the Rajya Sabha, it will have life permanently unless it is voted down. In any case, in 1968, this bill was passed in the Lok Sabha but was not taken up for debate in the Rajya Sabha. So it lapsed. It was subsequently reintroduced in Parliament several times in 1971, 77, 85, 1989, 96, 98, 2001, and most recently again in 2005. How many times can you try to do something and not be able to do it? So it raises the question, when Parliament says Parliament is supreme, well, act supreme then. Pass the law that you say you have the supreme right to pass. You've been trying for 42 years. It doesn't seem like you are very successful. Maybe you need help. Shall I help you? The next one. And who is in Parliament? Do you know why it did not pass? Because the kings of Parliament are jokers like this. He is the fox guarding the chicken coop. How can you expect him to pass a law that says, here, cut my head off? He will not do it. We have to do it for him. Next. I want to give you some more examples because this idea of parliamentary supremacy is something to think about. Parliament, I want to remind you, Parliament consists of elected representatives. The fact that they are elected is only half of the picture. They are representatives, and they are supposed to represent us. I'll give you 3 examples. In 2002, at that time there used to be this thing called the National Campaign for Electoral Reforms. Some of our more senior members of the audience may even have been part of it. And through the Association for Democratic Reforms, the National Campaign for Electoral Reforms, and a bunch of other organizations, we filed lawsuit in the Supreme Court saying that those who contest elections must declare their assets publicly so that people can know what is the kind of person that is seeking their vote. It went through a series of hearings in the Supreme Court, and finally in May of 2002, the Supreme Court ruled in our favor, saying that any person contesting an election must declare the following thing: his age, his income, his assets, the assets of the nearest relatives, and so on. This law was immediate. This is what you call law by judgment. That is, it is not part of the original constitution or law derived from it. It is law by judgment of the Supreme Court. Parliament took up debate on the verdict of the Supreme Court, and a few months afterward, Parliament passed an amendment to the Representation of People's Act, overruling the Supreme Court, saying the Election Commission shall ask for the following pieces of information. No other authority constituted by anybody anywhere in this country has the right to ask for any other piece of information other than this. And they diluted the whole thing totally. Virtually every party supported it. Therefore, to expect Parliament to represent us, my suggestion back to you is, when have you represented us correctly? That I should now trust you to represent me correctly. Instead, it is better, I will tell you what I want, you represent that. I don't want you to tell me that you are my representative and this is how you are representing me. I don't want that. I want to tell you what I want to be represented for. There's another case. It's a little bit of non-serious stuff also. In 1995, the Cricket Association of Bengal staged a match, India versus England, I believe, in Calcutta. The question came up whether BCCI and the Cricket Association of Bengal had the right to broadcast the match to anybody that they wanted to, or whether they could be forced under the law to either give it to Doordarshan or Prasar Bharati or any of these institutions of the government. And in a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court passed in 1995, it was ruled that the airwaves are the people's property. That while the government may regulate it, the government cannot prohibit you from actually using the airwaves to propagate messages that you want to propagate, including entertainment messages like sporting matches. It is 16 years since that judgment. The government has never disputed it, never asked for a bench hearing, never asked for any revision of that judgment. But they have not yet written the rules to implement the judgment. That's all. The reason you do not have news on radio today is that the government has not written the rules for news on radio. If you start a radio news station, nobody can touch you. It is perfectly legal to do it. But they will find some other reason to come after you. Because they do not want news on radio. Radio is too cheap, too easily available, too widely available, that if you allow communication of important things to happen over radio, the people might actually know what is happening in this country. Once again, I tell you, Parliament has not represented us well. Moreover, in the last 35 years or so, but not 30, 27 plus years certainly, since Rajiv Gandhi's landslide victory certainly, the Parliament has not had a majority. There has not been an elected government of India that commanded more than 50% of the vote since God knows when. Why 50? They have not even come close to 40. That is 40% of those who go to vote. Parliament can only claim that there is implied consent of the others. The actual consent that they have got for the ruling coalition or ruling party is less than 20% of the people's vote. Parliament cannot claim it is supreme. And there was one more example. This is another thing, because once we are finished with the Lokapala bill, we'll go to this also. The election finance reforms, that is to say that party spending during elections is very grotesque and illegal. There was a law passed in Parliament. Both houses of Parliament passed that law earlier in the last decade. Once again, the rules for election finance reform are yet to be written. And that is why you don't have election finance reform. So the institutional process that Parliament now says is our prerogative, they themselves have not followed. How can they now come and say this is our prerogative? Next. And I'm not going to go into the details here, but I'm going to make one point. We'll come to the details later. And now they say, if you give a version of one bill, we will give another version. We will debate the merits and demerits of this other version. We will make one joint version, cabinet committee will look at it, standing committee will look at it, Parliament will debate, blah, 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 blah. Parliament has not voted against anything since the Shah Bano judgment. Did you know that? Parliament in this country has not voted down even one bill since the Shah Bano judgment. Because legislators in Parliament do not have the right to vote according to their conscience. They have to vote according to the way their party leaders tell them to, or else they will be disqualified. That is the law. In a typical democracy like the UK or the US or any Western democracy, or even in more contentious ones like Japan, in a typical year there will be 10 bills that Parliament rejects. In the UK, I actually counted this some 3 years ago. There were 72 bills that the Parliament of UK rejected some 3 or 4 years ago. If that is the case, how can it be that in 27 years the Parliament of India has not rejected even one bill? Because Parliament is not a decision-making body. Parliament is a rubber stamp for decisions that have already been made by the leadership of the ruling party or the ruling coalition. If Parliament wants to claim the authority to do something, it must first demonstrate that it has exercised by its example the ability to do that thing. You cannot claim an authority that you have never shown the capacity to exercise. Next. Now we are here. Are we having a joint drafting committee or are we talking to a wall? There is a reason why they don't want you to see the video of the joint drafting committee meetings. If you actually watch them, it will be quite interesting. Because it will be like a pantomime. One side will talk, the other, you will think one side is totally deaf and dumb, and the other side is talking to them and trying to teach them how to speak. That's how it will be. Because by and large, the civil society members will say one thing or the other about one provision of the Lokapala bill. The government will merely listen to all of it and at the end of the day say, these are our positions. Keep in mind one thing. There is an asymmetry in this. The representatives of civil society, including our own Nyayamurthy, have always told you why they support certain provisions. Why do they want the Prime Minister to be included in the Lokapala bill? Why do they want the judges to be included? Why do they think Lokayukta should have its own finances and machinery for investigation? They've always told you that. The government, on the other hand, tells you what its position is, but it does not tell you why its position is so. They do not want to engage in a reasonable and reasoned debate with you, the people, to say, let us come to a consensus or let us discuss this thing and whatever turns out to be the answer, we will adopt that answer. Instead, they want you to merely accept their answer, saying, we are your elected representatives. And my reply to that is, we can change that. Today you are my elected representative. Next time around, I will check whether you truly represented me. And if the answer turns out to be no, I will work to remove the elected part. We must do that. As citizens, it is our obligation to ensure that our representatives actually represent us and not merely tell us what they want. Next. The other criticism that is made is that it is middle-class intellectual citizenship, that it is not true citizenship. Last time I looked at Parliament, it was full of multimillionaires. In what way they represent us? If I am middle class and I don't represent the public, then 100% sure that Veerappa Moily and Chidambaram and Kapil Sibal do not represent the public. They are in the 99.4th percentile of income, even declared income. So there is the idea that merely because you are well off, merely because that you are educated, that you don't have a right to citizenship, we must not accept that. It is not right. Next. But I will also say this. Anti-corruption is a moral obligation. There are children in our country who live like this. If they live like this, it is our responsibility, it is our duty not only to ourselves, it is our duty to any sense of God that we have to go and do something about it. Discrimination and the suffering of people is a crime against God. We have to do something about it. To argue in intellectual terms the efficacy of something or the other is not enough. That we in India Against Corruption or in any other movement must say that I will do certain things because it is a grievous injury to my idea of myself and to the idea of human dignity to allow this to continue. That we must not allow this to continue. And that is why we must fight corruption. It has a price, and that price is mostly paid by people like this. Next. So we have reached this situation, the classic Abraham Lincoln quote. You can fool all of the people some of the time, some of the people all of the time, But the government's vigorous exercise now is to fool all of the people all of the time. And the sentence includes the word, you cannot do that. It's impractical. After a while, they tend to discover that you are trying to fool them. They tend to resent that, and they tend not to be fooled anymore. So between all of these things, we have reached a stalemate. The government now says, provision this, provision that, we'll do this, you do that, let us see, Parliament will decide. We have sitting committees and standing committees. God knows what they do, but we'll do something. Now we go to the... Now I want to tell you one more thing. This is another article that we published last month in India Together, saying what powers must the Lokpal have? It's a fair question. As much as I might disagree with the law minister or Chidambaram about what powers the Lokpal must have, I also cannot start off by saying, this is my point of view and I'm inflexible about it. I must at least recognize that throughout the world, there are some differences in the way national ombudsmen are structured. There are countries where the national ombudsman looks at every single person. There are countries where the national ombudsman does not look at the elected leader of government. There are countries where judges are outside the national ombudsman but are held accountable in a different way. We must recognize this diversity. Just because we believe something doesn't mean it is true. Which is why I don't like this practice of standing in a crowd of 5,000 people and saying, do you want the Prime Minister to be covered by the Lokpal bill? I don't think we should do that. Because the crowd will naturally say yes. If you ask, do you want the Pakistani Prime Minister to be covered by the Lokpal bill also, they will say yes. This is not the way to drive consensus. We must recognize that there is diversity. We may not always have agreement, but we must recognize that there is diversity. In any event, if you are able to, I urge you to access this and look at it. Different countries have different ways of doing it, their national ombudsman. Next. On the 24th of April in Delhi, there was a roundtable conference organized in India International Center. And I tell you this, it was my privilege to be there. There I was only an observer, but among the invitees to that national conference on the Lokpal bill, I assure you there has not been a more respected body of people ever to have considered any legislation in the history of independent India. Justice Venkatachalaya from our own, not only from Bangalore, from our own neighborhood, literally, was co-chairing that meeting. And he was saying that too, that the heads of anti-corruption, past heads of anti-corruption agencies, past judges of the Supreme Court and the High Courts, CBI directors, CVC heads, civil society leaders, and the many others who participated in this discussion represent really the best of India and represent the aspirations for the best that India can be. And there were 18 questions that were discussed over 6.5 hours at this meeting. There is a video recording of the entire thing which is online. We can arrange to make that available to people if you want to. Next. Now this is the heart of the matter. These are detailed questions. I'm going to list them for you and give some outline of how to think about them. We can also discuss them more at length when I'm finished. What is corruption? This is a very interesting thing, that the first thing to debate is what is corruption, because the Prevention of Corruption Act says certain things are corruption. Are those the only things that are corruption? Or should the definition of corruption itself be expanded? Supposing I'm a public servant, I do some favor for you, but I don't really benefit in any way. Is that corruption? Supposing I do something that causes money to be lost by the government, but I do not benefit. Is that corruption? If I merely obstruct an investigation, but I do not benefit, is that corruption? So there are questions that you can ask to say, what is corruption? Is a private transaction between two parties in which one of them cheats the other, is that corruption? Is that the kind of corruption that the Lokpal should be looking at? So there is a debate on that question. Second, who should be the Lokpal and who should appoint the Lokpal? Obviously, we want the people with the highest credibility and the highest authority to appoint the Lokapal. So it means usual thing, Prime Minister, Vice President, Leader of the Opposition, all the usual people, Supreme Court justices will be there. Who else should appoint the Lokapal? How should the Lokapal be selected? How many Lokapal members should there be? All these questions come up. And there can be a variety of answers to all of these things. The third question is one of the important ones. Should the Lokapal be able to start an investigation based on his own decision to decide who to investigate? That is, can the Lokapal and the Lokayukta launch suo motu investigations of anybody? The good news is that both the government and we in civil society are saying yes. That without this one point, no Lokapal will make sense. Because this is the thing that really, it's the thin end of the wedge. This is the thing that separates what is possible on the good side from what is possible on the bad side. That the Lokayukta and the Lokapal should have independent discretion to decide whom to investigate and to launch their investigations without asking anybody for permission. This, I think, we will get. This is one reason why I'm confident that we will get some kind of good legislation out of all this in the next few months. But we must make sure that as much of the good stuff as possible comes into it. The fourth question, should the Lokapal have its own machinery for investigation, or should it continue with deputed officers and finances that are given to it on a request basis by the government? Now, the government of India's view is that, well, you can have your own officers, but we will decide how much to fund it, or whether to fund it. This is how it will work in practice. If effective investigation costs a certain amount of money, and the government tells you, well, we can't give you that amount of money, the translation is that the investigation will not be effective. Therefore, we cannot concede this point, that officers of the Lokayukta must be directly appointed or recruited into the Lokayukta, and that they must have the confidence that the financial and investigative machinery that they have in their office is autonomously available to them. After investigation, should the Lokapal be able to initiate prosecution against somebody if there is enough evidence of guilt? This is another point of difference. The government says no. After investigation, you can make a recommendation. If we agree, we will initiate prosecution. But that is the way it is. Now, we can send them more pictures of Raja. Should I investigate you? Should I lock you up? And the answer will come back, no. Are you stupid? They think that we are stupid. Many of the things that the government is saying, the reason they do not say it in public is that those things sound stupid even to the government. Can you really expect Kapil Sibal to say in a public platform, no. Even those who are found guilty by the Lokayukta, unless I give permission, you should not prosecute them. Will he really say that in public? He can't. That is the reason he doesn't talk to you about the bill. He's happy attacking. In football, there is a term. It's called playing the man. They don't play the ball. They play the man. A great player on the opposite side. Don't kick the ball. Kick him. This is what the government of India does. They are representing us by kicking us. They are elected to kick us. The next question is about Article 311. Some of you may know about Article 311. Article 311 is a provision of the Constitution that says civil servants of the National Administrative Services, that is All India Services, the IPS and the IAS. It's very hard to do anything against them. Now, this provision was initially put into the law because it was felt that you need an independent officer cadre to stand up to the politicians and tell them which things are bad and which things are good. And therefore, if you did not protect them from employment and other guarantees, that the politicians would abuse the administrative machinery. To some extent, that is true. Even today, there are fine upstanding officers of both the IAS and the IPS. But equally, there are fine upstanding officers of the Karnataka Administrative Services and the KSPS. There is good and bad in all sections of society. I don't think that IAS or IPS is particularly good or particularly bad. There are bad apples in every section of the officer cadre. But Article 311 protects the national administrative officers from being either suspended or dismissed from service. In the General Lokpal draft, it is proposed that a recommendation from the Lokpal, that is, after an investigation, if the Lokpal makes a recommendation that an officer of the IAS or the IPS should be dismissed or suspended, then that shall have the same weight as currently. Now the presidential order is the way to get rid of a person. So there is a section of Article 311, 311B, which is proposed to be amended to allow IAS and IPS officers who are found guilty in an investigation to be acted against. The government says no. I suspect it's the officers themselves speaking through the government who are saying no. Most of the time, what passes in Parliament is actually what is decided by the officers. Most MPs have never read most of the bills that they vote on. As our Lokayukta likes to remind us in many meetings, he said, in 2008, Parliament passed 18 bills in 2 minutes. You can't even count 18 pages in the time it takes to in the time it took them to go through that exercise. I guarantee you, nobody read that bill. They always ask this question, who are these 5 people? Who are these 45 people who are supporting them? Who are they to represent civil society? I ask you, sir, how many members of Parliament have read the bills that you have actually voted upon? 5 is more than double the number that usually read a bill. Most bills are read by one person, passed by everybody else. That is true not only in Delhi, it is true everywhere in this country. Legislators do not draft legislation at all. It is written for them by somebody, and there is a need for wider citizen participation in changing that. Then comes the question of should the Lokpal monitor the judges and the Prime Minister? These are 2 different questions. On the judges, the difference is not so great actually. The difference is should the Lokpal monitor the judges or should the Judicial Commission, the National Judicial Commission that is being proposed, monitor the judges? The Constitution gives an independent place to the judiciary. Therefore, the fear is that if you make the Lokpal monitor the judges, somebody will challenge it in the Supreme Court, and the constitutionality of the Lokpal bill itself will be may be struck down by the Supreme Court. It's a reasonable fear. We can't ignore that. So what we are saying is, well, the original position was that judges should be included in anti-corruption legislation. But one possibility may be that the National Judicial Commission bill and the Lokpal bill can be moved together. And if accountability for the justices is set up in the same way or the same day as accountability for everybody else, that may be sufficient. On the Prime Minister, there are, again, the popular perception is to say the Prime Minister should be included, nobody should be above the law. But like I said, elsewhere in the world, there are places where it has been discussed that the Prime Minister or the President may be left out because political pressure has a way of acting too. You remember Nixon. Nixon did not resign because he was prosecuted. Nixon resigned because there was political pressure to resign after he had been found prima facie guilty of participating in something wrong. So at some level, we have to balance political pressure with systems pressure. The last point is, should legislative conduct be covered? That is, when legislators speak inside the floor of the House, when they speak in the Vidhan Sabha, when they speak in Parliament, should what they say there be covered by the Lokpal? Or should what they do there be covered by the Lokpal? I think here we have to make a distinction between what they say and what they do. If they commit a murder inside Parliament, obviously it's covered. Therefore, what we have to make is a distinction between what are the things they can do inside Parliament which amount to representation, for which they need privilege, and what are the things that don't amount to representation and which do not need privilege. Next. So I'm down to the last few slides. One of the things that we can do as an exercise is say, well, they're saying so many things about Parliament and parliamentarians. Can we, here in Karnataka, say, we will ask all our parliamentarians, even all our MLAs, we'll ask key questions on the Lokpal bill and say, do you support this or not? If Parliament has a particular view, why should that view be discovered only in Delhi? The parliamentarian is from here. I know where his house is. I can go there and ask him his view myself. Why don't we, in each state, each of us in our own constituency, simply ask the parliamentarians, do you want suo motu powers of investigation for the Lokpal? Do you want prosecutorial powers? Do you think Lokpal should have his own departmental money and personnel? Some 4 or 5 questions. Get the response of every parliamentarian, and we will say, we have discovered Parliament's view. There is no need for these 5 people to tell us. I think we should do that. It is a part of active citizenship to ask our parliamentarians what their view is. Has your parliamentarian told you? No. Isn't it surprising that there is so much discussion about Parliament's view of the Lokpal bill, and yet very few of us can tell what our parliamentarian's view is? Next. Now we come to this. People always ask, how will it help me? I think there are 4 ways in which it will help you, and a 5th thing that it will do, which will be helpful, even if not directly to you. The Lokpal bill will ensure that those who represent us are treated under the law as public servants. If the Lokpal bill passes, the 2 corporators who have got a stay order from the High Court will be prosecuted. End of story. Their claim that they are not public servants will not stand beyond that. Resources that are wasted today will be put to public use. This is true. We know this connection inherently. We know that if the contractor is giving 4.5% to the corporator or the MLA or whoever, that 4.5% is money that could have been used productively elsewhere. We need to put more of our tax money to public good and public use, and not to line the pockets of individuals. The judicial machinery and administrative apparatus will be local. This is an important point. Today, we want the Chief Minister or the Lokayukta to fix problems. It will never happen that way. Those offices are so far removed from our everyday problems that we have to find a way of saying that the administrative machinery of correct government should be local. That through the office of the Lokayukta at the district level, I should be able to complain against a particular official and be sure that action will be taken, because the law requires that action should be taken within 6 months, that the investigation should be completed. If the Lokpal bill passes, administration will become more local. And that means that individuals, that citizens like you and me will have more control over what happens in government. The processes for doing things will be regulated better. One of the things in the Jan Lokpal bill says each department shall have a citizens' charter. Each department shall have a list of services that it provides, a timetable for providing those services, and penalties that are applicable if those services are not provided within that period. So the process for public administration will be improved if the Jan Lokpal bill passes. Therefore, the public officials should know what is the likely penalty, what is the likely consequence of not doing their job correctly. And the citizens themselves should know this, so that if the job is not done correctly, they can go and demand that the public officials should be acted against. And last, the principle that citizens are supreme. Today, if I am fighting for the Lokpal bill, this is the number 1 reason. I want to establish the principle that in this country, the citizens are supreme, not parliament, not the justices, not any other body, that if they do not represent us meaningfully, correctly, constitutionally, that we have every right to demand a change. The supremacy of the citizen is the single most important reason why we must all support the Jan Lokpal bill. Next. How can we help? So I'm going to bring you back to Gopal Krishna Gokhale, which is to say, become a servant of India. To be a servant of India is not only to demand legislation in Parliament, but to have concern for the poor and the underprivileged in our own neighborhood, on our own street. To be able to understand how their school systems work, how their hospital systems work or do not work, how they find jobs or do not find jobs, how they support their families or do not support their families. That if more of us can be servants of India, then it will not matter what Parliament does or does not do. Thank you. We we can, I don't know how you want to do this. You want to have like an open discussion or? Yeah. Sure. Is there a microphone that people can go with? And there was a hand mic somewhere, right? One second. We are getting a microphone, sir. Ilva?
No, I think the hall is fine.
Okay. You say what, you speak your question. I'll repeat it and then we'll solve. Yes, sir. I'll repeat the questions. Please come, sir.
I am E. Srikantaya, a resident of Venar Colony. The question is, the government seriously talks of Lokapala bill. At the same time, starts attacking another group, not directly. They have let loose a loose-tongued Digvijay Singh to carry on a daily attack on it. So they are not sincere on that. I think they are themselves not serious of introducing a bill. They are only thinking of how to sabotage this bill. And for this, they are adopting this tactics of letting loose a person. And he is known for creating controversies. And this attack is being carried on a daily basis, almost every day. Now, let me say that whether the government is sincere or not, they should establish by this. The latest news in the TV I read yesterday was, in the others, with regard to the others housing scam, the Union Minister Vilas Rao Deshmukh and the former Chief Minister of Maharashtra has admitted this has gone out of way, has recommended to generals to be allotted flats there. He says, because they served in Maharashtra, I have permitted them to get that flat. See, army generals do not belong to any particular state, Maharashtra or Karnataka, wherever they are put there. That does not mean they are serving Karnataka or they are serving Maharashtra. They are serving the army and serving the country. So, my question to Mr. Ashwin is, should the Lokapal take serious note of what Deshmukh had said and his admittance of being involved in allotting flats to that? Should not the Lokapal recommend to the government that this particular minister be dropped immediately from the ministry?
Sir, I don't know what to say except to say I agree with you. When the history of India is written further, there will be no Deshmukh, there will be no Digvijay Singh. These are ships that are passing in the night. There is not much we can do about it. So we should just say, okay, who cares what this? In fact, the best we can do is to remind Mr. Digvijay Singh that his last experience as a politician was to be told by the people of his own state to go away. So when the people of his own state have told him to go away, I don't think there is anything more that we need to say. Sir, please come.
Sir, I am Bhagwan Das Bhandari. Sir, you are referring that the Prime Minister or the Chief Justice should be excluded. The democracy is government by the people, of the people, and for the people. And since the corruption has been traced to highest post of judiciary and even to the Prime Minister's office, is there any justification to exclude them? One. Number two, if I am honest, I'm not applauding or praising anybody, but it was Prime Minister, ex-Prime Minister Vajpayee who told that even the Prime Minister should be made accountable, he will be available. So, if I am honest, why I should be bothered about any law? Because my this thing is that everyone should be included.
Now, I should clarify, when I was discussing the Prime Minister and the judges, I wanted to give you both sides of the argument. I think this is how a public debate should be. It should not be that I tell you my side of the argument and leave it to the imagination. I'm telling you that why people think the judges should be. In the case of the judges, it is not a question of exclusion, but a different mechanism for judicial accountability. In the case of the Prime Minister, it is a question of exclusion. I do not want to exclude the Prime Minister. There is no question of excluding the Prime Minister. At the same time, I was telling you that there are countries that have discussed this at length and found it useful to leave out the Prime Minister. That is also true. Those countries are not particularly corrupt. They are reasonably good, well-governed countries. So there is a system of political pressure also and a system of administrative and legal mechanisms to tackle these things. Like I said, but our position is that nobody is above the law. And in fact, the current Prime Minister is on record saying that he wants the Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister to be included. I should also make a distinction between the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office. Now, there are three situations, actually. One is the person of the Prime Minister and certain things that he does. I assure you that there are certain things that the Prime Minister does that should not be investigated. Foreign policy, international relations pertaining to acts of war. There are things that a Prime Minister is oversight of the spy agencies. There are certain things that the Prime Minister does which, while they should have parliamentary oversight, there's questions about whether they should have Lokapala-like oversight. There are some questions. I don't know the answer. I'm just giving you the scenario. The second is the Prime Minister's office. Nobody is arguing that the Prime Minister's office should be excluded. Even the government, I think, is quite willing to say every official in the Prime Minister's office will be included in the Lokapal's mandate. The third is the peculiar situation that we have in many of our countries of the Prime Minister retaining a portfolio for himself. When he is also the finance minister, for example, can you make a distinction between the Prime Minister as the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister as the finance minister? So the one worry is that if you exclude the Prime Minister, this will just give him an incentive to keep more portfolios to himself. So we need to work through this logic. Yes.
Another farcical situation is that they are being made as ministers and then they go for election. That is the biggest blunder.
Digvijay Singh himself.
I am Surya Prakash. See, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, he is the chairman of the committee which is drafting, has made a statement that if this thing has been televised, the deliberations have been televised, it will become a circus. I don't know on what basis Mr. Pranab Mukherjee has said that, because the highest authority, that is the parliament, the deliberations are being televised. Therefore, we the citizens are seeing many buffoons there. And we have become international, the jokers in the international world. Therefore, Pranab Mukherjee should have been very careful in uttering words. Therefore, next my thing is, I want to ask Mr. Ashwin, when I saw the slides about the scams happening, I think you should have shown the slides which is happening in Karnataka also, because the mining scams or the land grabbing scams are happening. Particularly, I understand that he is also in one of the committees constituted by the government, whether his views are being taken or it is taken for granted or he is being snubbed. I want to know from him as a member of the committee constituted by the government. And the most important thing I want to know is, the Lokapal is really a fantastic thing to happen. But I want to know whether the Lokapal is having the checks and balances, because a couple of years back we thought that the judiciary is one of the most important and most honest organization in the world. But now we see the chief justices of Supreme Court, what is happening there. Therefore, what is the checks and balances which is being contemplated in the Lokapal?
Thank you, sir. Three things. Of the 4 pictures that were included in my slide on 2010, you said the corruption, recent political history of India. You can put that up if you can, Shashank. 2 of the pictures are from Karnataka. One is a picture of mining operations in Karnataka, clearly. The other is a picture of a KIDB land allotment process. Clearly, it is not my intention to exclude Karnataka from the spotlight. It is both unfortunate and shameful that we have come to be so much in the spotlight for corruption in recent years. Now, as regards the acceptability or acceptance of what I may say, well, that is not for me to say. I still say what I say. I don't want to say more than that. In some cases, people listen. In some cases, people don't. The last point about the Lokpal and the accountability of the Lokpal. This is an important thing. In theory, a powerful office can exercise more discretion and therefore be itself vulnerable to a certain kind of corruption. This is why processes become important. If the process for appointment is detailed and based on scrutiny, if it is based on the consensual view of lots of people who are respected in society, then we at some level may need to trust that such a process is likely to produce a reasonable person. We have to have that confidence. If you say that the Prime Minister of India, the Vice President of India, the Leader of the Opposition, 2 judges of the Supreme Court, and 2 civil society nominees selected by them appointed a crook, then we have a much bigger problem than the Lokpal legislation. But what we have suggested, however, is that there should be a search committee. That the process of searching for suitable persons to be on the Lokpal should be carried out by a search committee. The search committee, by consensus, will recommend the names of individuals for possible appointment to the appointments committee headed by the Prime Minister or the Vice President, depending on who is on it. And that selection will happen only out of those who are nominated. I believe that at some level, the details of this process will be something we have to trust. That if so many people from a wide spectrum of public office and from civil society, somehow if at the end of all that you still get the wrong person, I would be unfortunate, yes, that is one part. But it's unlikely or less likely. The second thing is that you do not want to create a single Lokpal. I think this is another thing I should have clarified earlier. The objective now is to create a bench-like situation for the Lokpal too. Unfortunate reality is that given the extent of corruption in this country, the Lokpal is likely to have a lot of work. Therefore, it may not be enough to have one Lokpal. That it would be better to have. Also, the public administration machinery in this country is fairly big. 4 million people work for the government in Karnataka alone. So, in some ways, we've got to come up with a machinery in which lots of people are participating in anti-corruption work, and it was proposed, therefore, that the Lokpal would be kind of like the Supreme Court itself. One chief Lokpal, and a number of others, like we have in the Information Commission, like we have in the Supreme Court, to have the Lokpal as an institution rather than an individual. The advantage with that also is that the direct impact of any one person who is not the greatest person is that much limited. That by assignment of hearings, by rotation of hearings, and by demanding bench hearings whenever you are unsatisfied with individual hearings, you can actually get better deliberations. The second thing I should also say that the Lokpal's decisions on many things will not be binding, in the sense that every decision of the Lokpal or the Lokayukta, like it is now, will be appealable in the High Courts and the Supreme Courts anyway. So in some way, the hope is that a detailed institutional machinery will make it unlikely that the kind of situation that Sir was asking about will come about. I want to say 2 quick things because people may start leaving quickly. One is that we have a whole bunch of badges here. I'm wearing one of these badges that says Bhrashtachara Saku. We are asking people to wear these badges every day until the Lokpal bill is passed. They are small enough to be unobtrusive, and I believe they are popular enough to be fashionable. So therefore, I encourage each one of you to wear them. We are also circulating, I think, a sign-up sheet for those of you who want to help Corruption Saku or any other part of the work that we do in government, or to make public life better. I ask you to sign up and please volunteer with us. We can take the next question.
Good morning to you all. I am Major General Prasad from the Indian Army, retired just recently. And I joined an organization helping Janagraha, one of the organization NGOs. In addition to what Mr. Ashwin has said, we have launched a website called IPaidAbribe.com for past 1.5 years. We have had more than 30 million hits so far. I request you to report cases of any case of bribe or corruption on this website. And a sad thing which I would like to tell you that there's a national website, out of all the cities, Bangalore is the most corrupt city in India today. This is a shame. We do the research every month. What we do is whatever data we collect, we sieve it, and then the people who have paid bribe, or rather when they report, their names get excluded because person who pays bribe is also culpable. So therefore we take out the names, we collect these cases and take it to the right machinery at the government. And in Bangalore, we have had case where RTO is the most corrupt, followed by sub-registrar's office. If you can go and visit this site, you can ask any question on corruption, we will answer you on that. So that's why I just wanted to make this announcement. IPaidAbribe.com. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. I'm familiar. I know Raghu reasonably well, and it's a good thing. I think more people are speaking up and reporting cases of corruption. I hope we will get one day to I didn't have to pay a bribe.com. That's the goal. Really.
Also who have not paid bribe. They say I have not paid bribe. We also highlight this.
Excellent.
People who don't take bribe.
No, excellent.
Highlight that also to the government.
Now, I want to go back to an earlier point that I made, that the other day I got an email from somebody saying, sir, can you ask BMTC to publish a list of its procedures for various responsibilities within the department or within the corporation? And I said, okay, I will see what I can do, but what is the motivation for your question? And he came back and he said, in BESCOM they have done that. They have put out a detailed list of various procedures. And then I believe that, he was saying that I believe that because the public know the procedures, there has been a diminishing of corruption in BESCOM as a result of it. Now, I don't know if BESCOM has become less corrupt or not, that's a different issue. But I think it's a good thing to have processes in place by which people know what to expect from a government department, which allows them to judge whether their experience with the government department is good or bad.
ಆತ್ಮೀಯರೇ, ಇಷ್ಟೊತ್ತು ತಾವು ಜನಲೋಕಪಾಲ್ ಬಿಲ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಮಾಹಿತಿಯನ್ನು ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರಿ. ನಾಳಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಈ ಒಂದು ಸಭಾಂಗಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಶ್ರದ್ಧಾವಾಣಿ ಗಣೇಶ್ ಅವರಿಂದ ಭಾರತ ಕ್ಷಾತ್ರ ಪರಂಪರೆ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಶ್ರೀಮತಿ ದೀಪ್ತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಶ್ರೀ ತಿರುಮಲೆ ಅವರ ಪ್ರಾಯೋಜಕ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ 20ರಿಂದ 24ವರೆಗೂ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ನಡೆಯುತ್ತೆ. ಜನಲೋಕಪಾಲ್ ಬಿಲ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ಟಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಅಶ್ವಿನ್ ಮಹೇಶ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಹೃತ್ಪೂರ್ವಕ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಸಲ್ಲಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಮತ್ತು ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್. No, we had only 3 questions. ಸೊ ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಗೋಖಲೆ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ನಮಗೆ ಜಾಗವನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ನೀವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಬಂದ್ರಿ, ತಮಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ ತಿಳಿಸಿ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಜೈ ಹಿಂದ್, ಜೈ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ.